Thank you very much. Hello, my name is Jessica, and I am a transgender woman. I'm here today to talk to you about how, as designers and developers, we can build web experiences, apps, websites, services that don't frustrate people who are transitioning, because this is something I'm going through at the moment. And as a developer myself, it's something I'm very passionate about. And we've all got the ability here to sort of make a better world and make a more inclusive world, get the right one, for everyone. um, so yeah, let's see what we can learn today. So what I'm going to cover is, first off, we're going to take you back to school, and we're going to talk a little bit about what it means to be trans. And then we're going to start delving into some personal bits of information that you guys might take for granted that you provide when you sign up for an account or that sort of thing, that are slightly more, not problematic, but a bit more personal to trans people in particular. So name and title, and also gender and sex. And we're going to talk about what the difference is between the two a little bit as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we can design with this in mind. I have some examples of some websites that are good and some bad ones as well. So I'm going to be doing some naming and shaming and giving some props as well. And I've also collaborated a bit with the trans community on Instagram, and I've done some interviews. So we're going to see quite a few quotes from some real trans people, obviously myself as well, about what they think, because I think it's really important to sort of put a face and a name and a voice to this, and not just be the only person who's telling you guys what this is like. Out of curiosity, with a show of hands, who's had a conversation with a trans person, not including myself? Fantastic. That is a lot more hands than I was expecting. That's great. Right. Before I really get into it, I just want to say, first off, the LGBT spectrum is exactly that. There's a lot of nuance. Everyone's experience is different. I am just one perspective, and I can only really represent myself and the people that I know and talk to. I'm going to be talking in broad terms, and I'm going to be glossing over some stuff. So I don't mean it as an offense, but I'm trying my best to kind of represent as many people in the trans community as possible. So first off, a little bit of background on myself. So I started working in IT 6 years ago, and I've been breaking computers ever since. So yeah, that's me. Scarcely believable looking at it, to be honest. I graduated in 2016 from Foundation IT, and my career was going well. And then suddenly, in February, everything changed. I realized that I could put into words for the first time that I didn't really identify with being male, and in fact identified as a woman instead, which is kind of the definition of transgender. So as you'd imagine, this is a bit of a big scary time, realizing that the last 28 years of your life kind of doesn't make any sense anymore. But I accepted that about myself and started sort of working through that. And this is where my sort of transition began. Very quickly, I'm sort of making changes, changing how I look, how I dress, and also realizing that I feel very differently about myself. This is me sort of 5 months after that original realization. My confidence grows day by day. I keep trying new experiences. And generally, I'm just more comfortable with this notion that I am a woman. So that brings us pretty much up to today. So for those who aren't in the know, let's talk about some terms that are going to pop up throughout this presentation. So first off, what is transgender? Well, here's a very wordy definition from Stonewall, one of the more prominent equal rights charities. It's a term that describes people who don't necessarily identify strongly with their birth gender, or sex specifically. Sex is a biological thing, so this is kind of DNA-wise who you were born as, and gender is more an identity. It's how you think about yourself. So within the transgender spectrum, there's a load of other words and identities. Another one that's going to come up a lot is non-binary. This is basically when you don't really identify with either of the binary genders, man or woman, or male or female. So this could mean that you identify with neither, or that you identify with both. And then we've also got gender fluid, which this cute little comic will tell you means that your identity can change. It's perhaps situational, it perhaps just depends on how you feel, but you could identify as a girl, a boy, neither, or both, which is pretty fun. Right, so let's get into it. Let's start with one of the big ones. Let's talk about names. So what is a name? Well, it's a pretty big part of who you are, but for a lot of trans people, it's something that they change. I didn't used to be called Jessica. It's a name that I picked for myself, and it's a really big part of who I am, how I consider myself to be. That does mean, however, that I have a name which I don't use anymore. And for trans people in my situation, that name kind of represents a part of your life that you're trying to leave behind. And so the use of that name is pretty negative. So the term that's often used in the community is dead name, because you're trying to kill it. So yeah, anytime that I see my dead name, whether it be online or I get a letter or somebody uses it in person, God forbid, that's not a fun experience. That's pretty awful, to be honest. Right, so what can we do as developers and designers to help people deal with their name online? Well, first off, pretty obvious, let people change their name. This isn't just a trans issue, this is just a general issue. You know, if you change your name for any reason, which anyone can do, you might want to be able to update that in various places. Or if you get married, you know, you might change your surname. But yeah, if you are going to provide a way for people to change their name, try and do it online. I know this is, if you're working with a smaller company and you're on a very small or new project, this maybe doesn't apply. But if you work for a large company, quite often you're going to have to ring someone up or post something off, and that's a bit of a faff, and it's also not a very humanizing experience. Avery says, I haven't called them, but that's the last thing I want to do. Well, I've had to make probably about 15 phone calls over the last 3 or so months, and yeah, it's not fun. I don't like having to deal with this on the phone. Make sure that when people change their name, it changes everywhere. So try and avoid, you know, people can change their name, but there's a different database which the name's already stored in, and so if they go on a certain web page, then it's going to show their old name, or maybe they're still registered on the email system under their old name. That's not fun, particularly because you think you've done what you need to do, and then you get surprised by it. Alexis says, I must say it is incredibly irritating to repeatedly update my name and gender in a system only to have it present the old name when I log in at a later time. A positive experience, Charlotte says, when I receive promotional emails, it's obviously a boost to see Charlotte rather than my male name on an email about dresses or makeup. So something that's quite important. If you're working on a system where you need people to prove that their name has changed, try and make that as simple as possible. It's really nice when I've came across a website where they're like, oh yeah, just change it, it's fine. But for certain stuff, yeah, like your bank, you will need to prove that your name has changed with some legal document. So Avery once again says, if legal proof is required, please allow me to upload a PDF so I don't have to go through a phone tree and possibly mail or fax it. Spot the American. And Martha says, I couldn't get an address out of Sky for my deed poll, which is a name change document, until I went around 3 departments. Well, trans issue or not, that's terrible customer service if you're being bounced around that much. So we can do better. Right, so on to some examples. These are examples that I have been through. So to tell you a bit about how it feels. So first off, here's how not to do a name change next. If you go on the Next website and you go to change details, you'll notice nowhere on this page is name mentioned. In fact, nowhere in my account is name mentioned. So it's immediately not obvious what it is that I need to do to change my name. If you look in the top right, you can see I already have, but we'll get to that. So I decided to have a look at the help pages, and there is actually an article which gives you 3 options. There's apparently a contact form you can use to change your name. You can call them up, don't want to do that, or I can post, and that might take forever, it might get lost, who knows. So if I decide to have a look at that contact form, it's literally just the chat. So I'm going to have to just message some random person. They're going to have no idea why I've messaged them, and I'm basically just going to have to tell them that I'm trans. So that's not fun. In this particular case, I just stopped using my old account and made a new one, which is not exactly a fun user experience. So on the flip side of this, LinkedIn. LinkedIn does this right. It's really painless, and it's really obvious what you're supposed to do. So you go to your profile, you hit edit, you get a first name and a last name field, you change them, and you hit save. And that's it. And it changes everywhere. And then when you get an email, it's your name. So it shouldn't be hard, but somehow it is for some companies. So yeah, and this is really nice to come across. When I realized I had to change my name, I had 150 places I needed to change it. And okay, some of this is like my Spotify account, but some of it is more serious than that. And to come across something like LinkedIn, and then it's like, oh, cool, that took 2 seconds, on to the next one, is pretty nice. So let's talk about titles. Titles, Mr., Mrs., Ms., all of that good stuff. First off, there are gender-neutral titles. You might see them sometimes. MX is the usual one. There's also IND, which stands for individual, which is a little more neutral. Anyone can use any title. There's no legal precedence. You can just decide to be whatever you want. And you don't need a legal document to change it. But I guess, why are we still using titles? Who cares? Please just don't. I appreciate that sometimes when you want to be formal, using a title is quite nice. But I would imagine for most of the stuff that we are working on, you probably want to use first name, and it's a bit more personable. So yeah, it's just another avenue of data collection that's just going to frustrate people. So yeah, first off, obviously, make sure there's non-binary titles if you're going to ask people for titles. Nick says, the notion of gender outside of a male-female binary is lost on most people, sadly. I've seen very few websites offer gender-neutral titles. It's frankly a surprise when it does happen. Pippa says, a gender-neutral option, an M or an MX, something along those lines. Personally, I still roll my eyes at the circus of Miss, Mrs. and Ms. Me too. So yeah, let's maybe just not use titles. Nadia says that Flickr has been great for years. It allows you to write your gender and pronouns, and it doesn't ask you for a title. So that's good. That's a positive experience, and that's allowing someone to use their service and not feel bad about themselves. So, title done wrong, my old pension company, through my old job. So at first it looks pretty straightforward. We've got a drop down here with some options. We have a lot of options. MX is on the list, so that's great. There's also Right Honourable and also Wing Commander, which is amazing. That one, please. But then, so right now I've got my female name in, and if I decide to change to Mr., I get the following message. Sex implied by title, male, does not match sex of member, female. Okay, first off, your title doesn't imply your gender. Your name does not imply your gender. And the word sex here is being used incorrectly, because what they really mean is gender. So, oh dear, not good. I actually when I started changing my name through my pension, I realized it was going to be a long, convoluted process. So I just wanted to change my title in the meantime, make me feel a little better about it. No. So, boo. Title done right, Amazon. You can put your name on your address. It doesn't ask you for a title because it doesn't matter. Mic drop. So let's talk about gender. To many trans people, gender's like kind of a big deal. It's different for different people. Everybody's got a slightly different idea of what their gender identity is, and trying to put people into nice, neat boxes doesn't always work. So that's something to bear in mind. Yeah, but yeah, it's unique, and labeling people kind of works, but everybody's got a slightly different take. If you ask two trans people what it means to be trans, you might get two different answers. Yeah, so this was something that I found when I started asking people, which quite surprised me, is that people who you think are in the same sort of situation actually would rather pick different things when asked online. Blake says, I definitely prefer putting down female versus trans woman or something along those lines. I'm the same. Give me an option that is woman, female. That's what I'm going to pick, because that's what I am. Nadia says, right now it would be transgender because that is what I am. But once I'm fully transitioned, I guess it will be female. Both of these takes on this are completely valid, and that's how they feel about themselves. So if you provide trans people with different options, they may pick things that you're not expecting them to. But that's how they feel about themselves. So it's the correct option. And this applies also to non-binary and gender fluid people. Katie says, I would probably choose fluid, as that's what I identify with the most at the moment. Whereas a different Katie says that I suppose as someone who presents mostly as male and separates out my two sides, I usually just use the appropriate name and gender depending on context. Buying women's clothes, female. Buying a motorbike, male. I don't believe they've got a motorbike. Other is a bit of a thorny word. Depending on who you ask, they'll either be okay with it or not. Nick, again, says ideally gender fluid or non-binary, but I'd settle for other. Whereas Katie is a bit more disparaging and says that other is almost as bad as no option, in my opinion. I think the problem with other is if you don't provide people with adequate enough options, they're going to feel like you think they're everyone else. And it is quite dehumanizing to be like, oh, we've got these options, but you're not one of them. And so that's not a nice feeling. So how can we do better? Provide good gender choices. Pippa says, I'm sure a lot of people think they're going to have to run through the queer alphabet, but non-binary, agender, or genderqueer are all great starts. This is a sentiment that I share. You don't have to have 50 options. If you've got 5 or 6, it's better than 2. And that means more of your users are going to be happier picking an option that you give them. It's very difficult to do asking people for their gender right, because there's not really a right way. But anything is better than male and female only. And Brooke says, if there's a way for me to select multiple, I check female and trans female. Yes, gender identities do overlap. People might like to select more than one. So I think this comes down to, why are you asking people for their gender? Is it for marketing reasons? Is it relevant to the product? And is it better to ask them about what it is they want or what they want to see or do, rather than ask them about their gender identity? But if you must, there's plenty you can do to at least be better than most sites out there. And also, running theme, but let people change their gender later. Blake says, I can't change the gender of my Pokemon Go character, and that kind of sucks. I appreciate a lot of you just laughed. That was kind of the intention. But actually, as a trans person, this is the sort of thing that you deal with on a daily basis. Because everywhere you go, there'll be a reminder of that person you're not. And And yeah, it's a game, but every time, having spoke to Blake about this more, she's actually going to just create a new account because she just can't bear to look at her old male character on it. So yeah, it's a big issue. I mentioned sex before is not the same as gender. It's more a biological thing. If you need to ask for sex, and I appreciate the innuendo, please explain why you want sex. Because it's usually not necessary for you to be asking what somebody's birth gender is, birth biological sex is. If you're in a medical context, sure. If it's a government thing, maybe. But typically speaking, the word comes up and people wonder why. Martha says, I'm sure on lots of websites, sex and gender were used interchangeably. They definitely are. We've already seen one example. And Blake says, when it asks for sex and it involves health, I did put male down and felt bad about it, but my health is more closely related to male. So even if you've got the best of intentions and it is absolutely what you need to ask for, it's still not something that some trans people are going to feel comfortable talking about. So as I said, just try not to ask if you can avoid it. Avery says, for most businesses, I would probably they'd rather not ask my gender for my profile unless it's important. And Gabriella says, at the end of the day, I'll be a customer, patron, or whatever, so why does it matter that much? So yeah, just consider why it is you're collecting this information, and rather than, well, everybody else does, think about, are you going to use it? And what purpose is it serving? Because every time, again, I've said it before, but every time you ask for some personal information like that, you open yourself up to the opportunity that someone has a bad experience with the way that you've asked, and it turns them off from what it is that you're wanting them to be doing. So, examples. Gender done wrong. I really like Give Blood. I like what they do. I like how important giving blood is. Unfortunately, this was a really bad experience. If you go to your account, down here, there's gender, male, and okay, cool, it's my gender, maybe I should be able to change that. If I hit edit, no, just my name and my title. Okay, right, cool, this is a website, there's lots of things on this website, let's go and have a look and see if there's a reason I can't change it, or if there's a process. So, we saw on the next website, there's a page which tells you what you need to do. No, there's nothing. There's literally nothing. So I don't even know where to start with this website. I don't even know who I would need to talk to, what page I would need to go on. It's not a very nice feeling. And to be honest, I think this is actually one of those contexts where they're on about sex and not gender. Because there's probably, I'm no expert, but there's probably some medical reason why the sex of my blood matters. But I would at least like it to be clear why that information is there, what they're doing with it, and if it can't be changed, why. On the flip side, gender done right, OkCupid, fantastic example of how to do gender right. So to begin with, you get your standard familiar binary woman and man. But if that's not satisfactory, you can hit more options, and you get 22 options to pick from. And you can pick up to 5. So that's pretty cool. There are definitely some on there that I'm not terribly familiar with, but if, for example, you are a woman and you're gender fluid and you're transsexual or transgender, then you can pick all of those, and that's pretty cool. So kind of getting a bit more abstract now. Whenever somebody uses a website, an app, a service, and they have a bad experience, that's going to turn them off. Amber says, some of this stuff is just so demeaning, I've either closed my account and remade it, or just left it under my dead name. That's not great. There's definitely, Give Blood we've just seen, but there's many examples of sites where I really didn't have much of a choice but to just kind of shrug my shoulders and go, well, I guess this sucks. And if you are trying to sell a product to someone or get them to use your service, if they're not happy with the options you present them, they'll go somewhere else. Brooke says, I was then told I'd have to go in store with my court order to change it. Instead of dealing with that, I cancelled my service and am now with another company. And Blake said, I was told about a dating app. I signed up but didn't use it as it didn't have an option for me to state that I am a trans woman. So I guess the moral of the story really is try and give people choice. Choice is very powerful. Try and make sure that those choices are informed. You don't have to, especially with gender, list absolutely every possibility, but at least try and make a bit of an effort, and just make sure that people can change their mind later, because your identity is something that changes. And I'm not just saying this as a trans person, but as we go through life, our sense of self changes and we make changes to who we are and how we think of ourselves. And so allowing people to do that will make sure that they're more comfortable continuing to use your service for longer. I'd like to thank the lovely people on Instagram that helped me put this talk together. It was really insightful talking to them and hearing their unique perspectives. I had an idea of what I wanted to say, but having spoke to a few more people, I actually was surprised at some of their answers. So thank you very much to them. I'd also like to make a sort of a shout out thank you to my company, Komodo. They were one of the first groups of people that I came out to, and that was a really warm, inviting experience. So that's really allowed me to be the person that I am and sort of live my best life quite publicly. So thank you very much to them. There's some of them there at the back if you wave your arms wildly. We are actually hiring at the moment, so if you are a JavaScript developer and you like React, or we've also got some Laravel roles, so please chat to us later if you're interested. It's a fun place to work. There are dogs. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you all very much.